Professor Sivaraman Venkataraman. He has pursued his Bachelor's of Architecture at the School of Architecture and Planning, SAP, South India's premier academy of architecture and design. He has worked as an architectural student trainee, as an assistant architect, as an associate designer, as an architectural assistant, and as an architect at several institutes and organizations. Since May 2013 until date, he has his own consulting practice. Apart from this, he also works as an assistant professor and as a visiting faculty at the Prime College of Architecture and Planning, Anna University. He's also worked as an associate professor and as a visiting faculty at Deer Institute, Anna University, and at Midas Swarna Bhumi, Anna University. He has won 4 gold medals and silver medal in national level competitions organized by Rashtriya Sanskrit Sansthan, representing Tamil Nadu for the past consecutive 5 years.
This is AR6203, Theory of Architecture Part 2, Unit 2. In Unit 1, we saw meaning of architecture, and this unit we will be seeing architectural character. This unit will try to understand architecture as a product of historical context through introduction of various aspects such as character and style, and we will be seeing examples from architectural movements as well. So, we will have an idea of character, style in this unit. So, before starting with, we need to understand what character is and what style is. You can compare this with the interpretation of human beings, like how we interpret a human being, his character or his style. Likewise, in architecture also, we can interpret through the outlook, the way it behaves in its environment. So, in architecture, character is a primary virtue, just like in a human being. It is a central issue in the question of meaning. So, it all leads to the meaning of being there. So, the analogy between interpreting the buildings in architecture is in terms with the human physiognomy, the human life as well. The character of a building broadly is classified into 3 main categories: the functional character of a building, the associated character of a building, the personal character of a building. These 3 characters help us to analyze a building, to understand a building better, how it behaves, in what context was it created, was it built. Character is a distinctive quality of an individual. Likewise, a building has its own character, but style is in a manner in which it is done, it is expressed, just like in human beings as well. We will see how it goes by means of examples today. I will go into the functional character, the 3 different categories of character of a building. The functional character of a building: every building has specific functions and is made for specific broad purposes. The internal planning is in coordination with the exterior facade that tells us the purpose of the building. The external appearance plays an important role in determining the purpose and the function of the structure. For example, the elements of the building, the sizes of the window or the openings indicate us what kind of building, what kind of activity happens inside. The wide entrances that invite people inside, that has a good interaction between inside and outside. The elements such as towers, the form, the intimidating form, towers, sloped roof, etc. It shows its character, it helps us to identify its character. The functional character of a building. We see some examples here of religious buildings, because religious buildings are the oldest manifestation and expression of character in buildings, in architecture. So, we have Golden Temple Amritsar, which is a fine example of conglomeration of 2 different regions, one of the Persian and one of the Rajputana styles. So, we see very carefully chosen elements from these 2 regions here in Golden Temple, and it has got its own character of that. Most of the religious buildings of Amritsar are like this. There is another example of a mosque in Morocco. It is of a different faith. Even though they are religions, they all subjected to worship and prayer and God and activities. See the kind of differences they emerge, the kind of entrances, the openings, the style of it. You see the church in this slide. What does a church do? How does it look? What are the character of the church? The elements in it, what does it pose to you? the entrances, the wide entrances in the road area, the larger openings which cannot be actually accessed in the upper levels, but they have a very good opening from outside that also lets in light inside, and how light plays inside that area. So we see, we try to understand the character of a building, of its function, through the elements of the building. We see another example in the bottom is the airport building. So see the kind of opening, the huge openings they have, the kind of intimidating, inviting entrances, and it also reflects the kind of building it functions to. It is an airport building. Naturally, it has to be really huge, where it draws in a lot of people. You see another example here, another functional building where a lot of people come in front, and then this example is the Musée du Louvre in Paris, the Louvre Museum in Paris. It is an extension building done by IMPI, and then you see a huge plaza, and the plaza is opened out underneath, where the museum is located. The greatest artifacts of this century is located there, including the Mona Lisa. Underneath is another example of IIM Ahmedabad, designed by Louis Kahn in India. See the open spaces. Without even the number of people or the people here, we understand its purpose. It's a public building. It's a huge area in front, which really invites. You see another fine example here to understand the functional character of a building. You see this building, which the facade looks like a bubble, water bubble. Indeed, it's an aquatic center. It's a sports center designed by PTW Architects of Australia in China. This is an Olympic stadium, so to say, and you can see you can easily get the function of the building from its exterior itself. This is one way of expressing itself, and these are some buildings which actually express themselves, their functions openly. So what's an associated character of a building? Associated character mostly goes along with historical buildings. What happens is, some buildings are located in place, like in context of historical and cultural era. So they have to reflect the locality. They have to reflect the regionality of that place. So the character of some buildings is expressed through the elements associated with certain influences, and such influences often go thousands of years back in history and culture. This one is a good example from our own area. This is in Chennai. This is a Madras University Centenary building. You can as well see the dome, which is heavily inspired and influenced by local architecture of Islamic architecture. The arches and the way the brick is used, the spires, the towers. Even though it's a centenary building, even though it is an auditorium building and a university building, it doesn't look like one. So it tries to kind of imitate or kind of reflect the characters of religious buildings in this area, in this region. So that is one way of expressing itself. So this is called the associated character of a building. The inside has not much to do with the exterior. This is another example of the same architect. I have taken the same architect's example. This is Robert Phillips Chisholm. He lived in the late 18th century. He was one of the most prominent British architects who served in British India, and this is another building by him. So this building, the one in the above, is a Napier Museum in Thiruvananthapuram. It is still functional. This holds the museum of the artifacts of Kerala. And this building, as you can see, is reflects his study of the locality. He has not brought something from Britain or Europe for his architecture, whereas he has brought in, he has assimilated the local ideas of sloping roof and the usage of locally available materials such as bricks. Even the openings, the arches, everything reflects the local regional character. So this is the influence that he got from the local architecture. And this is another example. This is a Victoria Public Hall. This is right next to the central station in Chennai, and this building as well reflects the regionalism here. So this is one way of looking at the buildings, understanding its character. What's a personal character of a building? So what happens is, the creator, his creation reflects his idiosyncrasies, his own character. So the man is the building. So if the man is very bold and very dignified, his building, his philosophy is reflected in his buildings. So look at these examples. The character in architecture is comparable with the attributes of an individual creator. If a building is designed in the proper spirit of the creator, the personal characteristics of the person, such as the grace, dignity, simplicity, vigor and vitality, can be expressed as an integral part of the creation itself. Look at these buildings. These are buildings by Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid is one of the greatest architect who lived in this century, and then she was from Iraq, and then she found her freedom in the European countries, and then her buildings expressed the freedom that she always wanted for. And look at these lines. These are defying convention. They are not straight. They are defying conventional way of designing buildings. So they are all free flowing. They are all vital. They are all vigorous. So look at these buildings by the same architect. So her character of bold and that the seeking of freedom is expressed through her buildings. Look at the lines, look at the unconventionality, the movement, the dynamism of the buildings. It is also her own character which she has tried to reflect in her buildings. The spiral tower in Barcelona here, and the residential tower, one of the in New York. This is another example from India. So this is an example by architect Joseph Allenstein, who lived in the 50s and 60s. So he was one of the most influential architect in the independent India. So he was commissioned with a lot of projects in the capital city of New Delhi. And look at these buildings. So he expressed his character of dignity. So he always thought that the buildings have to look dignified, and then without nonsensical elements. So he lived with his time. He brought in modern architecture in India with his dignified looks. So there were straight lines with decent openings, and then very functional openings, very functional buildings as well. And this example is the Indian Habitat Center in New Delhi, which won a lot of awards. And the Sri Dharani Art Gallery. Look at the similarity in the character of the building. So you will immediately identify the building with the character of the person. So they need not have the same elements, similar elements such as that, but there will be something which integrates these two buildings, which makes you identify this building with him, the creator. This is another example of the personal character reflecting in a building. This is a world famous building. This is Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Barcelona. And what would you call this building, a fish or a ship? Well, we don't know, because the architect is always fascinated by the way fish, the form of the fish. So naturally he reflects all his buildings in ways of the fish. So he borrows heavily from the fish, its movement, and luckily this building was located on a shore. So naturally it was more appropriate for him to express this building as in the form of a fish. So this is one fine example of personal character reflecting in his creation. I would like to conclude this part of character through some notes. The character of a building depends upon its capacity to express a particular function and status. It is also in terms of space and time. In the historical styles of architecture, the function and status of a building were successfully expressed in variety of styles. So now we come into the style area. The character is expressed, but style is the way in you express it. So style has more connection towards the time in which it is built. The character could be the same, the dignity as a character could be the same, but the style of different times have made it possible in different ways. So just like an individual's personality is made up of unique qualities resulting from a combination of genetic factors, environment and upbringing, which distinguishes a person from others, a building comprises of various aspects that makes it unique and stand out. So every building should have a character, as stated by Le Corbusier. So it's a creator's input that makes the character much more stronger. So this is where architecture stands out. So it is highly intentional. So symbolism has become a major principle of architecture to convey a character in contemporary times. In today's architecture, so symbolism has always been a very strong element to express a building. Let's move on to style of a building. Architecture is a kind of art form. Style is the way you do it. It's a concept that focuses on the components of elements of a structure or system and unifies them into a coherent and functional whole according to a particular approach in achieving the objectives under the given constraints or limitations. So, this could be called as a style. So, it could be defined as a style. In general, however, style is a vocabulary we use when we classify buildings according to their appearance, structure, materials, and most importantly the historic period. So, style mostly has direct impact in times of its existence, of its creation. So, buildings are said to belong to the same classification or style when they share many of the same characteristics. So, the characters signify uniqueness, but style reflects general observation of a particular historical period. So, we compile, we conclude some buildings of similar style that was built in during a same period of time. So, we will see that through some examples. I am going into the movements of the different artistic movements and the architectural style movements that happened throughout till today. So, let us start with the prehistoric style. So, we would classify certain buildings under this style. So, what would be these buildings? So, prehistoric is architectural structures that remain partially intact today, were typically religious in nature, as I was telling you before. So, because religious architecture was made of more permanent materials such as brick and stone. So, such structures vary dramatically in terms of style and appearance, but reveal much about the building technologies and where there are engravings or paintings. This one is a good example, as a Stonehenge is a massive circular megalithic monument in the plains of southern United Kingdom and is one of the most famous prehistoric structures. By prehistoric, I mean that before the time of writing of history or recording of history, documenting history. We do not know who built these buildings per se, that is why. And another good example of a prehistoric style would be the Egyptian buildings, the ancient Egyptian buildings like the pyramids and the halls of the Pharaoh era. In ancient Egypt, which is between 3000 BC to 900 BC, before the existence of Christ, people lived in the omnipotence of gods, again religious connotation here, with many aspects of daily life carried out with the respect to the idea of the divine or supernatural and the way it was manifest in the moral cycles of generations. You will see the character of these buildings, of the prehistoric buildings, by the way they are expressed here. This is so coarse, not much ornamentation, but we still see the hands of the human beings here, really mega scales. These each stone would be around like 20 feet height, and these buildings inspired by the papyrus plant which grew near the Nile River. They were inspiring, and these buildings were inspired heavily by those. And then we see a lot of paintings, the fresco paintings, and different ways of depiction of everyday life in those times, and the connection between man and the god. Next to the prehistoric, we come to the classical style. The classical style forms two primary subcategories, the Greek and the Roman architecture. You see distinctive qualities, characters of the Greek and Roman architecture during the Hellenic period. I have not taken the very famous example of the hall in Athens, but I have taken some examples which are far from Greek as well in Sicily. Next comes the medieval style, the medieval styles in which the churches developed, and in which we had the Gothic churches. Medieval style, the period which started around like 800 AD, 800 years after the existence of Christ, had two important times of Romanesque architecture and Gothic architecture. Romanesque starts from Rome. It had heavier, stocky architecture with rounded arches were discovered, were invented, and lot of experiments were done in the massing of a building, even though only the ground floor is approachable area. The churches and castles of the earlier medieval period were constructed with thick walls and heavy piers, And in Gothic architecture, one of the good examples would be the Notre Dame, in which the ribbed vaulting, the flying buttresses and other innovations were involved. Then comes the Renaissance styles. Renaissance means the rebirth after the Gothic architecture, in which a lot of really Gothic and really wild structures were manifesting in buildings. Renaissance wanted to have a fresh look at nature and how it is expressed in architecture. So Renaissance style, with Renaissance style came more sophistication in buildings through use of geometry and proportion, the understanding of proportion. And Renaissance style indeed saw a lot of refreshing architectural buildings all over the world, especially in Rome, especially in the southern parts of Europe. This one example is the St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican by Michelangelo. Next comes the Baroque style, which followed along with the Renaissance style. Baroque is about over decoration, as you can see from these examples, and you will see too much craftsmanship and too much decoration inside the building as well as the exterior of the building. And it is just a extension and Renaissance architecture, which started the craftsman's refreshing ideas, continued with the Baroque style. And it was also the time after the French Revolution and the Central European Revolution of the common people, wherein a lot of craftsmen were available, and then they were all enthusiastically participating in building of the community as well as the society through public buildings. After the Baroque style starts with the neoclassical. The classical, as we know, it's before the Gothic and Romanesque period. So neoclassical means refreshing and bringing back the classical architecture, and this is very popularly exemplified by an architect called Andrea Palladio, and his buildings were called his own style of architecture was called the Palladian architecture. He was the architect of very popular the rich people of those times who were about to set up great industries during this time, using the land and the power of their stature, like duke and duchess. And then he was building for anybody who was rich in the whole of Europe, and his style of architecture was very highly sought after during that period. So all his buildings were symmetrical, beautifully proportioned, and then very high plinth and whatnot. So it reflected the character of the client as well. The same neoclassical and Greek revival style then it became so popular that the classicism that we saw in Greek and Roman architecture, the Hellenic period architecture, being reflected even in the modern times, even during the concrete times. These are some fine examples from India itself. This is in Fort Mumbai with the Asiatic Society Library. We always see the state, the royal buildings in India, such as the assembly halls, the court buildings of India, designed as the great hypostyle halls of the classical style. We still see that. This bottom is an example of in United States of America, the Lincoln Memorial, which kind of reflects the architecture from the Greek and the Hellenic period. Then comes the very refreshing, the Art Nouveau style, which basically was very highly influenced from nature. The man's connection to nature has to be established. So through the Art Nouveau style, it was expressed through fabrics and graphic design in the beginning, because it was very easy to draw and to paint, but converting that into architectural detailing and style took a lot of craftsmanship. But yes, a lot of architects such as Antoni Gaudí and Victor Horta, as you can see in these examples, have really tried it out with great architectural examples. These are unique, you cannot copy them so easily. They are so unique that there cannot be another building just like this again, because they were directly converted from sketches into buildings. The Beaux-Arts style, as it is called, Beaux-Arts in French means fine arts. So they wanted to revive, there has always been a lot of movements which had combination of the previous styles. So Beaux-Arts had the classicism and academic, the way of approaching theoretically into architecture. So they had symmetry as well as subtlety in its in its opening, in its manifestation of elements. But it also paved way to what would be called as a modernism later. So we will see how it goes. And there were neo-Gothic styles as well, like in neoclassical. So there are neo-Gothic. People wanted to revive the older ways of Gothicism, of building wildly. Art Deco was another style which had the beginnings of what is called the modernism. In the it's art decorative, so decorative art. They had good geometry as well as some things borrowed from the classicisms. So as you can see in these the dramatic lines of even the skyscrapers or in horizontal buildings, we had some fine examples here as well. So one is the Chrysler building, it was supposed to be the tallest building at its time of existence. And this is Dare House in Chennai, this is still alive. And another good example could be this Paris Corner building as well. But this Art Deco building had great influences in product designs and other arts styles as well. Then comes what is called the modernist style. The modernist is the style which basically is the strongest going, is still living architectural style, mainly because of the usage of the new elements such as the cement and steel and concrete. So this modern means the new era. So this word is coined by the Bauhaus school of architecture in Germany. This is soon after the First World War broke out. So this is when the new era has to be starting, and then this is where the new buildings have to be built. And these are some good examples in different parts of the world, how decoration is totally rejected, and then everything goes on to simple building in geometry and trying out new structures by means of the structural elements designed. The one example that we have shown is the Golconda building in Pondicherry, is the first real modern building in India built in the 1950s. Some good examples of modernist style. The modernist architecture can express a number of stylistic ideas, including the structuralism, formalism, Bauhaus, the international style, brutalism and minimalism. These are all the different isms, the different movements that came or that forms part of the modernist style. So we can keep on going on with examples like this. There are a lot of philosophies made out of this, from form follows function, form follows emphasis, form follows nothing, and then less is more and things like that. Yes, there are been a lot of new way of building it in modern architecture. After the modernist style, this comes the post-modernist, where you revive examples of classic architecture, but combine that with the modern buildings, modern way of building. So you can still see the pediment kind of the form in this building, the emergence of form in this building in a modern building. So this is one good example from Vana Venturi, the Venturi house by Robert Venturi. Finally, we come to this deconstructivism style, where you start from scratch by thinking very rationally and very boldly. So all your buildings are very rational, very bold, so they don't follow in any of the rules previously established or defined. So there are good examples of these two, and we will see them in the different works of architects that they have been doing here. Eclectic style is a style which combines all previous style or one or more combination of styles. Indian buildings and lot of commercial buildings have been eclectic style, and this one is in Rashtrapati Bhavan. It is a combination of Indo-Saracenic architecture and a lot of Hindu motifs and the British colonial architecture as well. The Vidhana Saudha, as we call it in Karnataka, is also a good example of eclectic style. There is also this regional style. Finally, we come to the regional style. So regional style is the style that is heavily influenced by the regions. So it belongs to only one particular region. It expresses the status of the community and society of the region. Finally, what would you expect? The student would expect from this unit is there are some points of inquisition, as I would call. Why does character mean in architecture? Why does it needed in architecture? How does your architecture stand out from others? So how does it make a difference? And why buildings from a particular period has a particular form? What were the styles popular in your region and why? How would you inquire about that. What's your favorite style of architecture and why? So the assignment would be to identify architectural styles of building of your favorite building from your area. Thank you.